Welcome back to Question Period. Prime Minister Mark Carney's first federal budget is being framed as a fiscal response to deteriorating trade relations with the United States. Punishing American tariffs remain on several Canadian goods and sectors, and trade talks, well, they remain on ice after the Ontario government anti-tariff ad that drew the ire of U.S. President Donald Trump. So, can the feds get back to the table? And is the U.S. administration genuinely interested in a deal? With me now to talk more about that is John Bolton, a former U.S. ambassador and former national security advisor to U.S. President Donald Trump. Ambassador, good to have you back on the program. Thank you for making the time.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
The issue of the president applying these tariffs through invoking essentially the justification of an emergency was before the Supreme Court this week. I wonder, from your point of view, do you think invoking that emergency is justification for applying those tariffs?
Well, I don't think so. And, you never want to draw too much out of the questions the judges ask, but they certainly seem very skeptical. And I think that's right. I had some dealing with the International Emergency Economic Powers Act back in the Reagan administration within a few years after Congress adopted it. Nobody thought it had anything to do with tariffs. So I think if I were going to bet now, I'd say that the court would invalidate the IEEPA-related tariffs. There are other ways to put tariffs in place, but for those which are the bulk of the so-called Liberation Day tariffs, I think they're in deep trouble. And it may be that decision, which hopefully will come before the end of the year, which would open up the possibility of negotiations between the U.S. and Canada and the U.S. and other countries that could lead to something more realistic and more stable.
It's interesting that you say that, because the White House and the president have at the same time said this is very consequential and then appeared to be dismissive. We'll always have a plan B at the same time. Do you think, though, ultimately, just by saying that it could reopen negotiations, that the president would be impacted in some way if the decision were to be against his case?
Well, I think it would be an extraordinarily significant negative impact on Trump. This is his signature program, and the court would be sweeping away the vast bulk of it if it comes out that way. It is a fact there are alternatives in the vast statutory mass of U.S. trade law that give other ways for the president to invoke tariffs, but they're much more restricted. They require procedural hoops to go through. And there are ways for Congress to peel them back. It may not occur before the 26th election, but the reason that Trump and his advisors picked IEEPA was that it was so sweeping and so without limitation. That's one reason I think the tariffs will be struck down. But it fundamentally changes Trump's negotiation position. He will not have the authority, if he loses in the Supreme Court, to have the size, the level, the scope of the tariffs that he claimed to have under IEEPA.
I did want to ask you about the economy, because there's, again, a couple of different things going on at the same time that may feel a bit strange, and I'm wondering how they might inform essentially the blowback to the president's tariff regime. You've definitely got prices going up, but not as much as economists might have predicted, because companies have absorbed the cost of a lot of the tariffs. You do, however, have pretty negative job numbers, and they could be getting worse. And then you do, on the other side again, have companies that have moved from Canada, for example, and taken their investment south of the border, which was the stated objective from Trump about what he wanted these tariffs to accomplish. Do you ultimately think that the tariffs and their economic impact will come back to bite Trump, and will it matter to him?
Yes, and remember, even though prices have not gone up as much as they might, it means for the companies absorbing tariffs that their profitability is going to go down, which is bad economic news for them. The fact is that the tariffs are not going to provide enough protection for many companies to bring substantial investment back into the United States. They set up facilities in Canada or Mexico, wherever, because they thought 1990s, we had decided to have a North American free trade area, and it made economic sense for them to be, let's say, in Canada. And if they think the tariffs are about to go away or there's substantial uncertainty, why should they risk extensive capital investment that may turn out not to be in their interest over a 10-year period rather than a short-term period? That's why the tariffs themselves are fundamentally negative for economic growth. They introduce this taxation not on Canadian companies, but on American consumers who have to pay the tariffs in the first instance. Break through the fog that Trump has created, I think there's a real opportunity to get this resolved fairly quickly. But we should know a lot more when the Supreme Court decides, because if they do strike the IEEPA tariffs down, it really is a new playing field.
I think it's been just over a few weeks since the president ended negotiations with Canada, as you referenced just now and earlier. He said it was because of that ad featuring Ronald Reagan and using some of what he has said around protectionism. Do you think it really was about the ad, or is kind of pulling out like that something that Trump does when he's negotiating?
Well, I think the ad stung him very badly, and it should have, because what Ronald Reagan was saying in that speech is, I'm against tariffs. I need to do it for this specific purpose against Japan. Hopefully it will be limited, and then we'll get back to more serious negotiations. It's about as clear as you can be. And I think Prime Minister Carney made a mistake to apologize for that ad. I think that showed weakness, and I think that will be in Trump's consciousness as he looks to see what the next steps are in negotiating with Canada. You haven't heard Xi Jinping apologize for anything that he's done, and I would say I don't like trade wars, especially with our closest neighbors. But remember how successful Xi Jinping was. What happened when Trump met with Xi in Korea, as a number of people in this country commented, is that Trump succeeded in ending the crisis he had created. That's it.
What is your advice to the Prime Minister as he attempts to navigate, I guess, trying to get negotiations trying to get negotiations happening again, pardon me, and also, I guess, satisfying the Canadian public and their appetite for, I think, as you vocalized, not apologizing?
Well, I would go slow for the next, let's say, 2 months. I think it's realistic. I think the Supreme Court understands how important this case is, how important getting a result out to the economy as a whole is. They'll make their constitutional decision or whatever the basis is. But speed is important. They've already recognized this by accelerating the briefing schedule. So it's possible, no guarantees, but possible their decision could come by the end of the year. I do think that will present a very different set of circumstances for Canada and other countries on which to negotiate whatever is going to come next. So if it's not much of a burden for Canadians to wait till the end of the year, that would be my suggestion. Don't take steps now that you can't retrace once the Supreme Court rules.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Ambassador Bolton, a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, we'll turn to the politics of this budget with the Scrum. Stephanie Levitz, Brian Platt, and David Coletto will join me after a short break. More question period just ahead.